Ever since I was ordained as a rabbi, my father insisted, despite my reluctance, that when the time came, I would conduct his funeral. He died on March 3rd of this year. "My rabbi has come," he said, when I arrived at his bedside, days before he died. I asked if he wanted to pray the vidui, the prayer we say on Yom Kippur and just before we die, in which we release our guilt and our shame and confess our wrongdoing and name our regrets and ask for forgiveness so we can leave the world lighter. My father said yes, he would like to say the vidui. He wanted me to guide him through his deathbed confession as his rabbi. The day before he died, I sat by my father's side as he lay with his eyes closed, remembering his failures and his mistakes, his sins and his shame. He recounted with pain the time after his stroke at age 52, after he suddenly lost his health, his mobility, and his position as the CEO and chairman of the board of an airline. After he lost all of his wealth and all of his savings, he could not pay the bills, and he was desperate. He went begging for loans to the banks who'd funded his businesses and to former associates. He remembered in particular a man who had co-chaired a Jewish Federation appeal with him, a multimillionaire as my father had just been. He asked this man for a small amount, an amount that he was embarrassed to need. Crushingly, the man denied even his small request. "I went to him like a dog," he said with bitterness in his voice, "and he sent me away like a dog." So did the banks. "They judge you by your net worth," he said. "I had none." My father, stripped of all status and dignity, felt a shame so deep and all-encompassing that he came to believe that he had no worth. "I have felt this shame for 40 years, he said on his deathbed. "I believed that I was worthless." This was the sin he most needed to confess before he died. My father's confession, his realization, was that he had measured his life wrong all along. Not only in the second half of his life when he quote unquote failed, but also in the first half of his life when he succeeded. As a CEO, as an employer, as a business and community leader, he thought his value was based on what he did in the world. He thought his worth was earned by his success, his ability to pay for the needs of his family, his productivity, his contributions to the economy, his status in society. And in the last 2 weeks of his life, however, he could finally begin to see how loved he was, despite all of his perceived failures, and how much his love had shaped the lives of the people around him. And wow, did he love in abundance. His was a beautiful love. But only in his last 2 weeks, only really in his last 2 days, did he understand that the measure of his life was not net worth, but love. That he was worthy just by being who he was. Perhaps you might think, I'm not like that. I don't have that problem. I know that my worth is not attached to my job. Do you really know? What if you became disabled tomorrow and could not do any of the things that make you feel accomplished, that make others look up to you, that give you a sense of purpose and pride and status, productivity and belonging? What if you lost your wealth and all of your property? What if you lost your job and there was no job on the horizon? What if you started losing trials or campaigns or clients or customers? What if your teaching reviews were unfavorable? Your articles weren't picked up, your book wasn't published, your film wasn't made, your building wasn't built, your project wasn't funded? What if your scholarship wasn't cited and you didn't get any awards or accolades or prizes or honors or promotions or recognitions? None at all. How then would you feel about your worth? Aren't we, most of us, chasing some next achievement, some next badge to prove our value to ourselves, to our loved ones? To whom exactly? I suspect that the older people here, and those retired, and those disabled, and those long unemployed, and those who parent full-time, might be the only ones who could say, not me. I know my worth is far beyond what I do in the world. Jews say the vidui repeatedly on Yom Kippur. We already said it twice tonight, and we'll say it 2 more times, or I think more tomorrow. We say that we've lied, that we've deceived, that we've mocked, that we've scorned, that we've slandered, that we've stolen, that we've cheated, that we've lusted, that we've been arrogant, that we've been corrupt. Perhaps we feel that this is true about us as individuals, and perhaps we do not. It is certainly true about humanity. Why do people lie and cheat and deceive and slander and mock? Isn't it because we think we're unworthy? Isn't it because of our insecurity that we strive to make ourselves seem bigger in comparison to others? Don't we lie because we think our truth is shameful or inadequate? Or because we're trying to deceive to gain the upper hand? What is beneath that drive if not a fear of our worthlessness? An idea that our only worth would be in besting another. Why would we steal except because we think our worth is defined by what we possess? Why would we cheat except if we can only know our worth by winning? Why would we slander if not for a belief that we benefit from the degradation of others? What is arrogance but a puffing up to hide our self-perceived worthlessness? I wonder whether this core misapprehension isn't behind all of our wrongdoing. Consider how this false understanding of our lives causes us to destroy our ecosystem. Think of how much of our carbon-burning, polluting activity, all of our elaborate busyness, is in a great striving to prove ourselves, to make our mark, to succeed. Think of how much marketing and consumption aims to fill our shaky sense of worth. Think of how much of our identity is based on our ranking in comparison to others. We're often so caught in our own insecurity, we cannot even see outside of ourselves. How can we respect the earth if we're so filled with a desperate need to prove our worth? Nimanti Nankimo is an indigenous activist and member of the Waorani Nation from the Amazonian region of Ecuador. She and other members of the Waorani people took the government of Ecuador to court over its plans to put their territory up for sale. Their 2019 court victory set a legal precedent for indigenous rights and protected 500,000 acres of rainforest from oil extraction. She said this: "This is my message to the Western world. Your civilization is killing life on Earth. I say to all of you, the Earth does not expect you to save her. She expects you to respect her. And we, as indigenous peoples, expect the same. This forest taught us how to walk lightly. And because we have listened, learned, and defended her, she has given us everything. And you are taking all this away, not just from us, but from everyone on the planet and from future generations. In all these years of taking from our lands, you have not had the courage or the curiosity or the respect to get to know us, to understand how we see and think and feel about what we know about life on Earth. You forced your civilization upon us, and now look where we are. Global pandemic, climate crisis, species extinction, and driving it all, widespread spiritual poverty. It took us thousands of years to get to know the Amazon rainforest, to understand her ways, her secrets, to learn how to survive and thrive with her. When you say that you are urgently looking for climate solutions, yet continue to build a world economy based on extraction and pollution, we know you are lying, because we are the closest to the land and the first to hear her cries. In Judaism, we say that to destroy a life is to destroy an entire world, and to save a life is to save an entire world. We quote it, but we haven't internalized it. That line comes from Mishnah Sanhedrin, in which the rabbis are instructing witnesses in a capital crime. They're warning that if the witnesses give false testimony, they will destroy not just this one life, but an entire world. Because even the life of a person awaiting execution can create an entire world. I have taught this text many times. Most rabbis have. It is almost a Judaic cliche. But we still don't understand it. Because if we did, our lives would look very different than they do. Our societies would look very different than they do. Our earth would look very different than it does. If every life can create a whole world, that means me, and it means you, and it means every person in a jail cell, and every person in a corner office. The text goes on to say that we were all created from a single ancestor, so that no one can ever say, my parent was greater than yours. And that the glory of God is demonstrated by our multitudinous diversity, our infinite uniquenesses. Therefore, the rabbis conclude, each of us must say, for my sake, the world was created. We each have worth beyond all measure. Rabbi Shai Held jokes that if you walk into a room of Jews and say, God loves you, they will think you became a Jew for Jesus. Held argues that we've got it all wrong about our religion. We've accepted the idea, in fact, often teach the idea, that Christianity cares about how you feel and what you believe, but Judaism only cares about what you do. Christianity is about love. Judaism is about law. The God of the Old Testament is angry and vindictive and bloodthirsty. The God of the New Testament is loving. In fact, God is just as angry in the New Testament as in the Hebrew Bible, and just as loving in the Hebrew Bible as in the New Testament. In his book, Anti-Judaism, David Nirenberg demonstrates that the theological discourse about a loveless Judaism and a loving Christianity was an active campaign by the Christian church to denigrate and supersede Judaism in its early days. We've absorbed these lies. Even we Jews believe them. Rabbi Held showers us with texts demonstrating God's love. And here's what's important. God does not love us because of anything we do to earn love. God does not love us only because we do mitzvot, or because we're chosen, or because we're good. God does not love us because we've proven ourselves worthy. God loves us from birth. God loves us from before we were born. Rabbi Akiva says in Pirkei Avot, Chaviv Adam, beloved, cherished is the human being, for they were created in the image of God. The Psalms marvel at God's love for us, as small as we are. Adonai, what are human beings that you care about us? Mortals that you think about us. Our lives are like mist, our days like passing shadows. We are so small, here so briefly, yet we are unfathomably loved. Rabbi Held says, what is true about being loved is true about having worth. We have worth from birth before we do anything to prove it. We only have to try to live up to the love and the worth we already have. He teaches, God loves human beings, so we are to love our neighbor. God loves the stranger, so we are to love the stranger. God loves the widow and the orphan, the defenseless and the hurting, so we are to love the defenseless and the hurting. Rashi says that when Moses tells us to cleave to God's ways, what it means to cleave to God's ways is simply do acts of love, as did the Holy Blessed One. Human beings are not the only objects of God's love. Chapter 1 of Genesis is a love story of God's utter delight in creation, in sea and earth and sky and stars, in seed-bearing plants and fruit trees of every kind, in myriad sea creatures and winged birds of every kind, and all the animals of the earth. We see God's pleasure in biodiversity, as God again and again says that it is good. Psalm 104 describes a flourishing, verdant, abundant, harmonious, interdependent ecosystem nurtured by an attentive, responsive God. Psalm 95 describes a mutual love between God and creation. The sky rejoices, the earth exults, the sea and all that's in it thunders, the fields and everything in them sing, the forests and everything in them shout for joy. In Perek Shirah, the rivers, the mountains, the dew, the rain, the dove, the wolf, the lion, the bear, the elephant, the snake, the scorpion, the snail, all sing out in joy and gratitude at the love they receive and the love they return. As Rabbi Held says, the whole point of creation is love. We are created with love, for love. As long as we believe that our worth must be proven, that love must be earned, that we must be productive to be valued, we will continue to destroy the world around us. Until we believe in our worth, until we know our worth, we are unable to fulfill our true mission on earth, which is to love. A wise friend challenged me this summer with a critique of Yom Kippur, specifically the Vidui. No offense, he said, but I think we do Yom Kippur all wrong. The point of Yom Kippur is to get us to change, right? Well, we know from psychology that criticism does not facilitate change. A criticized child feels worse about themselves, may even feel ashamed. And that bad feeling is actually an obstacle to change. Instead, the way to get a child to change is to positively reinforce desired behaviors. If we were really committed to changing ourselves on Yom Kippur, we would identify all that we did right in the last year and praise ourselves for those things. We would look at what enabled us to make good choices and reinforce those things in the coming year. He's not totally outside of the tradition, this friend. Musar master Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe said, "The beginning of all individual work is specifically the experience of our exaltedness from our very creation. A person who doesn't know the preciousness of their own soul is forbidden for them to search their faults and to make themselves suffer over their bad qualities." The starting place for change is knowledge of our own worth. We must know the exaltedness of our being and the preciousness of our soul in order to change. Life on earth depends on our ability to change. If we are serious about change, we will identify what conditions and ways of being bring out the best in us. We will quickly find that it involves doing less and doing it more slowly, moving at the speed of wisdom. Robin Wall Kimmerer says, "We need acts of restoration, not only for polluted waters and degraded lands, but also for our relationship to the world. We need to restore honor to the way we live so that when we walk through the world, we don't have to avert our eyes in shame. So we can hold our heads up high and receive the respectful acknowledgement of the rest of the earth's beings." As Jews, we know what an act of restoration with the world looks like. Every 7 years, Torah tells us to allow the land to rest for an entire year. It's called the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year for the earth. And this is a Shemitah year. This is the year for acts of restoration. This is the year for collective divestment from the path that leads to death and collective investment in the path that leads to life. This is the year in which we resensitize ourselves to the earth in its beauty, not as a producer, but as partners in the majesty of creation. As Jews, we also know what an act of restoration with ourselves looks like. Every 7 days, Torah tells us to allow ourselves to rest on Shabbat. This is a declaration that we are worthy not because we produce, we are worthy just because we are. In the last 2 weeks of his life, as my dad said goodbye over Zoom to all the people he loved, he was showered with gratitude and appreciation and so much love. He saw that he made a difference in their lives. He saw how loved he was. It's not that we didn't tell him before. He just couldn't take it in until he believed it himself. On the last night of his life, his kids and grandkids and my mom sat around his bed, and we all saw the change in him, that he was starting to believe that his life was worthy. Just in time, he started to understand that the true worth of his life was measured in love. And by that measure, he had wildly succeeded. We do not have to wait until the last night of our lives to know that we are already loved and worthy of it. We do not have to wait until the last day to measure our lives by love. Today, Yom Kippur is meant to simulate the last day of our lives. What if we begin right now? What if we begin today? Can you hear it, son?